was just kind of wild. What happened to me is that, I'm kind of wandering around through the woods and I'm thinking the government is tracking me and all these wild thoughts are going through my mind. And so I'm just continually moving and I'm walking nonstop for over 24 hours.
You're listening to the latest dose of Bipolar Recorder. This podcast may cause dizziness and blurred vision. Enjoy.
Welcome back to Bipolar Recorder. I'm Hunter Keegan. I know it's been a while since the last installment to the podcast. I've kind of had a lot going on. I've been bouncing between hosting online mental health peer support groups on Twitter, now known as X, and finishing up a new music project I've been working on for the last 8 or 9 months. An album, if you will. I released a single a couple of weeks ago. It's on Spotify and Apple Music and whatnot. It's called Look For Me. You can find it simply by searching my name, Hunter Keegan, on your favorite music streaming app. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that something else happened too. During the last couple weeks of November, I had a pretty significant hypomanic episode. Things got sketchy for a bit, and I took a break from the peer support spaces. A lot of people reached out to me during that time. Huge thanks to everyone in the community for their support. It really means a lot to me that you care about whether I live or die. Seriously. But I don't want to get too deep into the whole story there because it's kind of lengthy, and I'll do a proper installment about it for the show at a later point. If you want to stay abreast of real-time updates on the status of the show and the various events happening behind the scenes, definitely follow this project on Twitter at Bipolar Recorder. I also occasionally post on Instagram. That account is also at Bipolar Recorder. But Twitter is our main hub. I freaking love that app. I'm going to cling to it until Elon Musk runs it into the ground even further, and I'm definitely going to try to refrain from calling it X as much as possible. I post all sorts of stuff related to the show on there. I also have my personal account at HHKeegan if you want to follow my eclectic range of non-mental health related posts, primarily involving heavy metal music, professional boxing, and horror movies, because that's what I get down with. Anyway, until I can do a proper installment about it, if you'd like to get the lowdown on what happened in my life back in late November 2023, check out the updates I posted around that time on Twitter. Speaking of boxing, though, that's a really intense sport, I guess you could say. I've mentioned my love of watching, not participating, in boxing a couple of times before on Bipolar Recorder. Something that really appeals to me about following such a bizarre, brutal, and nowadays somewhat obscure sport is the fact that many of these athletes have incredibly raw human stories and lives that they lead outside of the ring. A lot of these dudes have mental health issues, some of which are exacerbated by competing in a sport that inherently results in head trauma. But there's another obscure sport out there. Okay, well, maybe the rest of the world is actually pretty familiar with it, but it's called handball. And it's not only an incredibly popular sport outside of the United States, but it's an Olympic sport. And while handball is not a combat sport that inherently results in head trauma, it is extremely competitive, and for elite athletes who are playing it at the Olympic level, it brings about a high level of physical and mental pressure. Those stressors can really have an impact on someone. And for today's installment of Bipolar Recorder, I had the great pleasure of being joined by Amy Gamble. Amy competed on the United States handball team in the 1988 Olympics. Beyond being an elite handball player, Amy also played Division I basketball at University of Tennessee back in the 1980s. How wild is that? What's even wilder is that in addition to her impressive athletic career, she's gone through a very intense journey with bipolar disorder. And luckily for us, she's spent the last several years sharing her story as an award-winning mental health advocate. She has been involved with National Alliance on Mental Illness, more commonly known as NAMI, as well as other mental health outreach organizations. She's also a published author whose most recent book, called Unsilenced, a Memoir of Healing from Trauma, just came out on November 30th. In this interview, Amy talks to us all about her early journey with bipolar disorder, her athletic career. We actually compare notes about our manic road trips to rural Montana, and of course, she shares about her recovery process. Just a couple of quick things to take note of, and I'd like to mention here that I'm trying to get away from the term quote-unquote trigger warning. I'm trying to call them something like content advisories or something else less stigmatizing, because here's the thing, a lot of this stuff that's triggering is actually really, really important to talk about. The main reason I give people a heads up about this sort of stuff is because I understand certain subject matter sometimes can hit really close to home. But I hope that doesn't scare people away from approaching these types of topics in a mature, mindful, and grounded manner. These are truly important dialogues that we're having throughout the course of this interview series, and if you're up for it, stick around because I'm sure you'll get a lot out of what we discuss during these conversations. With that said, I'd like to advise that Amy makes a couple of brief, non-graphic mentions of suicidality and sexual assault. It's important that she mentions these things because they are closely tied into the conditions that she lives with, which includes not only bipolar disorder, but comorbid post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Now, let's go ahead and hear from Amy Gamble. I'd like to welcome Amy Gamble to the show. Amy is a mental health advocate, author, and Olympian who reached out and offered to come on to discuss her life with bipolar disorder. Amy, I just wanted to thank you for being here this evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Absolutely. So I guess I just wanted to start at the beginning. How old were you when you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
It wasn't until I was 35 when I was first diagnosed, and I got into the system during a psychotic break,
Mm-hmm.
and that was when I got my initial diagnosis. But it had ran in my family, so I had an aunt who lived in actually a great aunt who lived her life in a mental institution with bipolar disorder. And then my mom and one of my sisters also had bipolar disorder. So when I presented with those psychotic symptoms, they immediately gave me that diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
How long do you think you had been living with symptoms for prior to age 35?
I think that I had certainly early onset bipolar, probably in middle school. And then later on in my freshman year of college, I had probably what would be considered a hypomanic episode.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of early in my life, but it would have been hard to diagnose as bipolar back then.
Looking back, what signs do you see that make you think you may have been experiencing hypomania around the time you got into college?
Yeah, so I just have this distinct memory of this one springtime. I had just finished playing basketball at the University of Tennessee, and I just had like all this energy. I mean, I was very energetic anyhow, being an athlete, Division I college athlete, and then later on, Olympic athlete. But it just was like I couldn't sit still. I had to keep moving. I had to keep doing different activities and could stay up all night long. And, which isn't unusual for a college student, but for
Hmm.
me, it could be like repetitively staying up late consistently. And I just remember looking back, it's only looking back that I could say that was hypomania because I didn't have words for it at the time.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And you were just mentioning a little bit about your athletic career, and I absolutely wanted to talk to you more about that. So, when you were in your early 20s, this was still years before you were formally diagnosed with bipolar. At the time, as you said, you didn't really have the words to describe these things as hypomania or mania or depression. Leading up to this diagnosis, you competed in the Olympics. You were a Division I college athlete, as you said. How do you think your mental health was being impacted by what I imagine was a very high pressure, like high intensity kind of environment and mindset to be in? How was that impacting your mental health, or vice versa? Do you think your mental health was impacting your athletic accomplishments or training or anything of that nature?
I think those are great questions. I think I would start by answering, was my mental health interfering with my ability to perform? And I would say that initially in my freshman year of college, and certainly into my sophomore year, that's when I first started experiencing the suicidal ideation or thoughts of suicide. And that was like right in the middle of, playing for one of the best college programs at the time in women's basketball. And I had this big billing going in. I was one of the top 5 players in the country and, high school All-American, this, that, and all the things. And then yet my mental health really interfered with my ability to perform. And
Hmm.
some of that had to do with trauma, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later. But these are things that I did not realize at the time. And then later on, I was able to recover relatively quickly. I think that speaks to a lot of the resilience that I had built up over time as a result of some of the earlier traumatic experiences that I had in life. But for sure, once I'm training for the Olympics, I had some periods of time when I had some depression and I just had to fight through it because it was a matter of either being able to perform or not being able to make the team. And
Hmm.
the drive to and the dream to become an Olympian and make that team was so important to me that I was able to overcome a lot of challenges.
And so, just for the purposes of context, what year did you compete in the Olympics? Like, roughly what time frame are we talking here?
Yeah, a long time ago, 1988. So that was in Seoul, Korea.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but the reason I ask
yeah.
that is because so in 1988, on these Olympic teams, was mental health part of the discussion at all in those days?
No, no, mental health was not discussed at all. And in fact, there was a lot of stigma around mental health. And really and truthfully, one of the reasons I struggled so much myself was because my mother had had a mental health crisis at the end of my freshman year of college. And she had a psychotic episode and ended up in a really tragic situation. And
Hmm.
so it was so taboo and stigmatized and people made that leap and some people even said that I was crazy
Hmm.
because I had a family member who struggled so much. So that a lot of that went on back then.
Yeah, when words get thrown around like that, crazy, psycho, psychotic, I understand that they get used as slang terms quite a bit, but I think when it's being like weaponized as, oh, this person is just a crazy person, it's very dismissive and toxic. So I hope that through having conversations like the one we're having right now, we can start to change these things. Now, after competing in the Olympics in handball,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah, that's
Can
right.
can for the audience, can you explain a little bit about what handball is? Because it's very popular throughout most of the world, but in the United States, I don't think so many people are familiar with it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm impressed with your background knowledge on it. So that's awesome. Yay for team handball. So team handball is like water polo on a gym court without the water, or with like soccer with your hands on a
Mhm.
court that's 130 feet long. So it's like a basketball court and a half. And there's goals at each end of the court. And each time you score a goal, it's worth 1 point. And on each team, there's 6 court players and a goalie on each team. So that's 14 players on the field at the same time or on the court at the same time.
Thank you for that overview. Very helpful for painting the picture. So in 1988, you went to the Olympics, competed. What was that period after the Olympics like? Did you notice any shifts after that point?
That's a great question because a lot of times Olympic athletes just in general have challenges with, you know, loss or grief after, career ending or the depression that comes with some types of transitions. But for me, I went directly from the Olympics, literally from Korea to Tucson, Arizona, where I picked up my basketball eligibility and competed at the University of Arizona in women's
Oh,
basketball. So I
whoa.
was just like on this high-speed train of going from one thing to the next to the next.
Yeah.
It wasn't until after the basketball was over and I was taking a boatload of classes, like 28 hours and 25 hours a semester, so I could graduate within a year and a half. And it really did impact my mental health at that time, after I was finished playing basketball.
And how old were you at that point?
So I would have been about 23 when I had just finished my eligibility at the time.
Okay, got you. And from that point up until your early to mid 30s when you were formally diagnosed, where did your bipolar journey take you? And what exactly was this episode that did result in the formal diagnosis like? It must have been different if you had been living with these symptoms for many years and it had kind of gone undetected to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and that's actually something that I've been trying to unravel, the complexity of coming to this what seemed like a sudden diagnosis of bipolar after years of struggling with depression and not, having like a threshold, meeting a threshold of manic symptoms that anyone would have seen or that I would have known to tell my doctor about. So, I was primarily struggling with severe depression for several years, and then finally I had gone to initially gone to Las Vegas and was living in Las Vegas working for a pharmaceutical company. That's how I started my career. And then jumped back to Arizona for a few years and then across the country to Philadelphia, where I was a director in a large pharmaceutical department. And I was having a lot of female problems, polycystic ovarian disease, endometriosis. And so I got treated with this drug that puts your body into early menopause. And it caused severe symptoms of menopause, like hot flashes, being unable to sleep at night, etc. And that sort of train just escalated. And then I ended up in a local hospital for this GI or GYN, OBGYN pain. And then they treated me with Demerol, like 5 days of injections of Demerol nonstop, and that triggered a psychotic episode.
Wow. So this was medically induced, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
How could you tell that you were beginning to become psychotic in the hospital? Or how
Um,
could they tell
I
that?
didn't know.
Yeah,
It was like really, dramatic as all of my psychotic episodes have been. It ended up being like really just this extreme dramatic situation. I ended up going into the chapel in the hospital and thinking that God was talking to me. And I punched a picture frame because I thought God told me to do it. And the glass
wow.
shattered all over the floor and I got cut. And then they came and then they ended up in this local hospital. It was a community-based hospital. They've since torn it down, but I ended up in this hospital and they restrained me for like 16 hours.
Oh my God.
So that was my initial like mental health like crisis situation.
Yeah.
And and that left me, as you can imagine, with some significant trauma after that.
Absolutely. So after that psychotic episode and the hospitalization, were you taking medication after that point? Like what was your reaction if you said that for you at the time it felt very unexpected and then you just get kind of for lack of a better term like railroaded by the medical establishment? Did you comply with treatment after that? Because I know in my case I didn't, right? So,
Right.
I mean, what was it like for you? Did you start taking your meds and try to get back on track in the traditional sense that people throw that term, get back on track around?
Well, I'll tell you, I got like a lot of people, I was admitted to a psych unit and actually a pretty world-renowned psych unit over in Maryland. And I was only there for like 5 or 6 days, which was totally not enough time to stabilize me. Because when I left, I was still psychotic and not doing very well. So I was taking some medications and they scheduled me with an outpatient psychiatrist. So I ended up going to see him and he told me to bring all my medication bottles. So I bring in all my medications and he sits across from me, opens each one of them and dumps them in the trash and tells me I don't have bipolar disorder.
Wow. Okay.
So,
Great.
and I was like, okay, wonderful. Yay for me. I don't have
Oh,
bipolar disorder because I
uh-huh.
certainly don't want to have it. But, I think, one of the reasons why I tell that story is because I know that a lot of us have encountered mental health care professionals along our journeys who have not been helpful,
Yeah.
made the journey so much more, incredibly more difficult. And don't get me wrong, there's been many who have made the journey much more pleasant for me,
Hmm.
but there have been some along my journey that was just was like absolute hell. And
Right.
he was definitely one of them. Yeah.
So he dissuaded you from thinking that you even have this in the first place, despite so what did he attribute the psychotic episode to, if not bipolar disorder?
He didn't really say. No
Okay.
one, in matter of fact, no one really talked to me about the psychotic episode at all.
Huh.
They just basically slapped me with a label, handed me like 5 different medications, and sent
Yeah.
me on my way. And then this guy dumps them all on the trash and says, you don't have it. Your mother has it. I can tell by talking to her on the phone, but you don't have it. And, that's that. It's probably anxiety. I
Mm.
was like, okay. So I don't, and at the
Well,
time,
I would say one of the red flags there is he said he could tell your mom is bipolar just by talking to her over the phone. It's like, what doctor says that?
that's right. That's right.
What?
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that
Yeah.
is so wild. Okay, so I actually have kind of a two-part question for you following up on all of this. I wanted to ask you in your words how mania feels, but then to get a little bit more specific, I Googled you prior to this recording and I saw one of the previous interviews you had done, and you were speaking to this interviewer about having once driven 2,000 miles to Montana
Yeah.
during a manic episode. I've done literally that same thing. I drove from DC out to Montana.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
yeah, like I'm not joking. It blew my mind when I saw that because I was like, oh my God, like, really? And so I too have wound up in the middle of Montana, out of my mind, like disoriented, having no idea what's going on. So, like I've written a book about that. I've explained it in my words what that's like, but I was wondering for you in your experience, what was driving out there like? Like if you could maybe try to explain a little bit about what was pushing you along to do that. I mean, I'm just so curious to hear from your
Yeah.
perspective what that was like.
Yeah. Sure. So actually, it was 11 years ago in December 2012. And leading up to that point, I had been in a lot of what I would loosely term trauma therapy. So I had a significant history in my past of being sexually assaulted by or sexually abused by 4 different people by the time I was 16, and something that I write about in my book on silence. And there was a case, the Jerry Sandusky case that was, so high profile about the Penn State guy who,
Where that's my alma mater. That
Oh, really? Okay.
that scandal happened like 2 months into my freshman year at Penn State.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't this so weird how there's this overlap happening?
That is wild. That's sort of divine intervention is what I would call it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, please continue.
Yeah. No, so this sort of high profile case kind of triggered up all these, unresolved traumatic memories that I had, and set me into this hypomanic manic state where I was awake for like days on end or with very little sleep, like a couple hours. And so this one night in particular, I had started to believe that my family was trying to poison me. And so I had this fear, and then so this fight or flight response is going on, and then I've got the mania and the psychosis coming. And so I leave my house at like 3 o'clock in the morning and just started driving west. And no rhyme to reason. I actually went a southern route down. So I live in West Virginia. I lived in West Virginia at the time, down through Tennessee, and then out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then
Hmm.
kept driving north.
Hmm.
It was just random. And the
Yeah.
wild thing about psychosis is that I knew enough to get out and use the bathroom, get gas.
Yeah.
I don't think I was eating at the time, but just the little things along the way, like the brain is functioning on one hand and then not on the other, like total
Yeah.
just being out of touch with reality. And so eventually I ended up in Montana and pulling off onto this road that went up into the mountain, and there was a log cabin up there. And in my psychotic state, I thought that the log cabin was mine and my friends were waiting in the basement to throw me a
Hmm.
birthday party. Like
Hmm.
just this, outlandish,
Totally.
uh, totally unreal thoughts. And I went in the cabin, and then thought if I was going to stay there for the winter that I'd need to go get supplies. So I ended
Hmm.
up getting back in the car and on the road, and I ended up getting lost in for taking an exit for a national forest in Idaho, and then
Yeah.
getting lost in the forest for a few days. And that was probably the culmination of everything just exploding all at one time,
Hmm.
between the reemergent trauma memories and then underlying bipolar disorder and not having the right treatment was a disaster.
Yeah, everything just kind of meshed together into this perfect storm of mania and psychosis. And I mean, when we're talking about Montana and you accidentally getting into this like wilderness area along the way to Idaho, like we're talking about extremely, extremely remote locations. Some people may not really understand if you're used to living in like a major metropolitan area, like there's nothing else out there. And
Yeah.
when you're so disoriented that, like for me, in my case, I remember being at not a log cabin, but like a lumber yard, like a logging mill out in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And I was trying to look at my GPS to figure out which way I was going. And even with the GPS, I could not like tell if I was going north or south. Like I didn't know where I was on a map. I couldn't tell which direction I was driving. It was crazy dangerous. I didn't get to the point where I actually like got out of my car and got lost. But what did happen is through a series of events, my dad actually ended up flying out to like from his house in Virginia. He flew out to Madison, Wisconsin, and we actually like rendezvoused there. And he ended up driving the rest of the way back because if I had tried to do that myself, I probably would have like not made it. But anyway, so in your case, did you actually get out of your vehicle and get like lost in the woods,
I
literally?
did. I did literally got lost in
Wow.
the wilderness. Yeah.
How did they find you?
Um, no one knew where I was, and so no one was
Okay.
looking for me. So it was just kind of wild. What happened to me is that, I'm kind of wandering around through the woods and I'm thinking the government is tracking me, and all these wild thoughts are going through my mind. And so I'm just continually moving, and I'm walking nonstop for over 24 hours. And then finally, I remember walking up this one mountain and side of the mountain, and I was just like, oh my God, I'm sick. It just like hit me.
Oh.
And then I look around and I'm like a needle in the haystack in the middle of all these massive trees, snow on the ground, and freezing cold outside, and I have not the proper clothing or boots or anything on, and I'm just like, wow, I don't want to die. And so I just kept, moving, doing the things. I was a hiker and a backpacker, so I kind of had some experience in that realm and knew to keep moving to stay warm. And eventually I came upon a couple people who were in the backcountry on ATVs after
Wow.
so it was two nights and 3 days wandering around.
That is so trippy. I'm glad you made it out of that safely.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, God bless those ATV uh
Yeah.
adventurers, I guess you could call them.
Yep.
So, with all of this, when we get into situations like this that can be very dangerous, and we're out in public situations and we're maybe lost, or we're in a circumstance where we may not really have our wits about ourselves, what can happen in certain scenarios is law enforcement gets involved. And in my experience, that has not been good. I was wondering what your experience with law enforcement has been like over the years, and what the outcomes with that were.
Well, I wish I could say I only had one experience. And the one experience we just talked about, the Montana experience, where, I went into that cabin. Once I got into the hospital in Idaho, the sheriff came on the side of the mountain that day. When I got up there, and actually he treated me very, very kindly, very nicely, got me to the hospital, and I got treated for a few weeks. It wasn't until I was out of the hospital that I ended up getting arrested for going into that cabin and got extradited from Idaho back to Montana.
Whoa.
Yeah. So in that sense, I have to say that, both when I spent a little bit of time in an Idaho jail and then in the small town in Montana, I mean, they gave me my medications. They treated me kindly. I have a different experience. I was in jail for like 3 weeks.
Okay.
Um, but they were compassionate and kind and understanding, actually, a lot of empathy. So I know that's not a lot of experiences that people have when they're in jail or prison or things like that.
Yeah.
But I was blessed. I was really blessed in that sense.
So you were charged with like what, like breaking and entering or something like that?
Yeah, I was charged with quite
So
a few
you like
things.
went to court and you were sentenced. This wasn't like you were
Well,
just being held.
actually, they ended up dropping all the charges against me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I was
But
really,
you were in jail in the meantime.
but I was in jail waiting for everything to work its way through the system, and then I
Yeah.
got released on probation. And then it took a little while, but not very long, and they ended up dropping all the charges as long as I followed through with a treatment plan.
Have you ever had to be brought to a hospital by police?
Yes. I had a psychotic episode when I was living in Arizona. Um,
Unfortunately, it's a very common experience for a lot of people, though, that ends up happening. So, do you feel like it was a necessary evil? Do you wish something could have been done differently in retrospect?
yeah, it was a really tragic experience. When I was in Arizona and had a psychotic episode, I was in downtown Phoenix and walking through thinking that I could walk through cars. I thought I was an angel, and the police came, picked me up. They drove me back to my home. They actually drove my vehicle for me, drove me back to my home. They called a crisis team. The crisis team came out, and the crisis team said, she's okay. She doesn't need help. So I didn't get the help in that moment. And then a few hours later, the police came to my house. I had pushed a Marine, an ex-Marine who had cleaned my pool for me. I had pushed him. And then a friend of mine, she yelled to call the police. And so I'm like very psychotic at the time, and
Hmm.
experiencing flashbacks, and just really not in my right mind. And the police came and they ended up dragging me from the back of my house to the front. And then I resisted getting in the back of the car.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up with a charge of resisting arrest, which I wasn't sure what I was being arrested for at the time.
Right, right.
And then the police officer said that I had slapped him, which I did have no recollection of ever slapping him.
Hmm.
But I do remember everything else that went on. So my argument
Yeah,
is if I remember everything else, there's a good chance that I probably didn't slap him either.
yeah.
But so it took about a year. I ended up getting charged for that and having to go through the court system on that. And did spend like a year on probation because of it. And I ended up with a misdemeanor charge, but still it was a charge and it was very traumatic for me.
Yeah. Speaking of trauma and PTSD and flashbacks and triggers and all of this,
Mhm.
do you want to talk a little bit more about that? I mean, living with trauma and having PTSD as a comorbidity with bipolar disorder is definitely very challenging.
Mhm.
Um, what do you wish people understood about living with a condition like PTSD?
I think that the as you mentioned, it's a comorbid condition. So not only are you dealing with trying to get bipolar disorder stabilized and mood stabilization, but then you're also dealing with, or I was also dealing with flashbacks that were coming as a result of triggers. And so what I hope that people understand is that people, or those of us who have a significant trauma history, um, we probably are going to have that term people are using more frequently now, complex trauma, where we've had multiple traumatic events in our past and it's adding up and it went on for a long period of time. And those symptoms may not present until a person is in adulthood, but nonetheless, they're presenting as flashbacks an event that happened, in my case, when I was very young. And so I think that the biggest frustration I probably have is for people who are well-meaning and want to be encouraging and they think they're doing the right thing, but through advocacy they tell us to just take our medications.
Right.
And I find that so patronizing,
Yeah.
because if it were easy as taking a pill, sign me up, I would take one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's very complicated and it's really hard to get on top of mental health when you have one condition, let alone when you have a couple at the same time.
Right. And growing up in a traumatic environment or living with trauma, it's wild because at the time you're just a kid trying to survive and move forward, and you are just inherently absorbing what's happening around you. And it's not until you're an adult, in my opinion, or in my experience, and you start getting further removed from it, and you realize you're still carrying all of this like whack baggage, and it's really starting to mess with you. It's wild how much that can impact you throughout life, and so we don't start addressing it until it gets to a point where, oh man, like this has gotten completely off the rails, right? For me, it was with like drinking, like alcohol abuse really excessively, was one of the main outcomes for like the type of issues that I've dealt with in my own life. But it expresses differently for everybody. So I'm glad that you brought that up and pointed that out. A lot of these things don't just stay in the past. We have to actually confront them and deal with them.
I think the one point that I would make about trauma, and particularly when you're young, that happens is that when a traumatic event happens, our thinking brain goes offline. And so when that brain goes offline, we don't have the cognitive ability to assign words or language to what happened. And if we're very young when something traumatic happened, we're not going to have the words anyhow.
Hmm.
It's not until later where an integration of the actual event, and the ability to assign words actually comes together, and we're able to make sense out of what happened to us. And that takes a long time to be able to do that.
Definitely. Well, what self-care are you practicing these days to balance all of these different challenges?
The first thing I have or I watch monitor very closely is my sleep. Because I know from I had ended up having a fantastic psychiatrist, and she would always the first thing she would ask me every time I would see her is how much are you sleeping, and
Mm,
just reinforcing that point. So making sure that I get to bed at a decent hour and have the right amount of sleep. And if there is a day when I don't get in bed as long as possible, as early as I should, or that I need to, then am I getting enough sleep throughout the course of the day? And so that's really, really important to me, because in any of my manic episodes or psychotic breaks, I've gone on those days long without sleeping. And so it helps me to keep everything in check, and it gives me more confidence to know I'm managing it. So that's one thing. And then another thing that I try to do is a lot of meditation, a lot of mindfulness strategies, and then getting outdoors as much as possible, and trying to get in touch with nature, and some exercise and things like that.
sounds extremely grounding and mindful.
Yeah.
Those are
I
the key
try.
things for me. Grounding and mindfulness is really what
Right.
it's all about. I do not practice meditation as much as I used to and as much as I should, but I've found that to be really helpful. Once you start getting good at it and you build up that self-discipline, that can be incredibly helpful. And sleep is such a basic thing that so many people, myself included, entirely neglect and don't have any sort of structure around. But sleep hygiene is definitely important. Going to bed at a certain time, getting up at a certain time, trying to get restful sleep. So I appreciate you bringing all of that up. And as we kind of reach our conclusion here, I did want to ask you, would you like to talk more about the specific mental health advocacy work that you've done over the years? You're, of course, an author. You've worked with National Alliance on Mental Illness and other organizations. Do you have any highlights that you'd like to point out or anything that you'd like to speak about regarding that work that you've done previously?
I did a lot of, I mentioned that with NAMI of our local chapter, NAMI Greater Wheeling, West Virginia, and was the executive director there for 5 years. So I think the work that I'm most proud of is being able to go out and speak with college students, and then, just randomly getting a follow-up email that where I was told that they went and sought help and felt comfortable seeking help because they heard me speak. And I followed that strategy of early intervention saves lives. And so that was just sort of the passion that was driving me. I ended up doing about 250 talks, and reaching about 20,000 people in a 5-year period of time. And then the pandemic happened, so that kind of interrupted
Hmm.
my advocacy efforts on that front. But yeah, the thing that I'm most proud of is giving people hope that when you get the right treatment, it does work, and finding that the right mental health care professionals and the right medications, if that's what you need to help manage your condition, that those things are all possible, and that you can have a great life. And that's the message that I wanted to be able to give, particularly to young people.
Yeah, I think that definitely those young populations are some of the most critical to reach out to with these types of messages. I was just at Penn State doing a couple of presentations for students out there. I think I say the actual statistic during the presentation, but it's something like 1 in 3 young adults each year encounter a diagnosable form of mental health condition, as opposed to 1 in 5 overall adults. So they're disproportionately impacted, and of course, suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States, and especially for young people. So, the more awareness that we can bring to these issues and the more help that we can provide to people, the more people realize that there is help out there in the first place, then, we can really start making strides toward a better future. Do you have any upcoming work that people should be keeping an eye out for? Any books, blogs, media appearances, anything that people should
Yeah, my
okay,
latest book on silence.
Unsilenced by
On
Amy
silence.
Gamble. Love
That's right.
that. Can people
Yep.
find that on Amazon?
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon.
Okay.
And that, it'll talk about a lot of what we've talked about today is in the book and in a lot greater detail in the story and the journey through that. And my hope is that it will provide hope for someone on their recovery journey and that they know that they're not alone, particularly people who have comorbid conditions with bipolar plus whatever, fill in the blank. And the other thing that I'm doing is partnering with NAMI Philadelphia.
Mm.
And we're going to be doing a navigating mental health crisis in February 1, I believe. And so I'm going to be a speaker on there, sharing my experiences with intersections with the criminal justice system and some of the pitfalls that we talked about today about, having the right providers be on your pathway, that sort of thing.
Phenomenal. That's really important work, and I hope that it goes well, and I wish you all the best with it. I wanted to thank you again so much for taking the time to talk with me this evening. Is there anything else you want to add before we end the recording?
The only thing that I would say is that if you're struggling with symptoms, whatever you do, don't give up, that you can get to symptom resolution and that, again, you can live a great life, even if you have struggled with a mental health condition.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Amy, and you're welcome back anytime. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
You too. Thank you so much.
All right. Be sure to check out Amy's new book, Unsilenced, a Memoir of Healing from Trauma. Available on Amazon. Again, that's Unsilenced, a Memoir of Healing from Trauma by Amy Gamble. Amy can also be found on Twitter at Amy J. Gamble, and her official website is amygambleauthor.com. Check the show notes for links. Thanks for listening to this 49th installment of Bipolar Recorder. Number 50 is right around the corner, and I'm trying to get that one out hopefully by January 1st, 2024, so we can be at an even 50 for the start of the new year. This project has developed extensively since October 2021. We now have dozens of hours of recorded podcast content available, as well as a thriving online peer support community, and I've even done real-world outreach with psychology students at Penn State University. Speaking of Penn State, it's too early to go into specifics, but I can say that I've been invited back up to speak to students during the 2024 spring semester. As always, I'm incredibly excited about this, and I'll keep you all posted on that as things continue to unfold. Bipolar Recorder is truly a grassroots independent effort. I've been networking with filmmakers lately, trying to see if I can find someone who could professionally shoot some of these real-world outreach presentations that I've been doing. I've also been brainstorming ways to raise funds for this project so I can continue paying for travel and lodging when I do outreach events like the ones at Penn State. If you would like to financially support this project, or if you have something cool that you think you could bring to the table, please visit bipolarrecorder.com to see how you can support this show and or get in touch with me. On bipolarrecorder.com, you can find unique, tangible merchandise that helps support this project. Make a $10 donation and get an awesome deluxe bumper sticker with the Red Skull logo. Make a $30 donation and get a signed copy of my own memoir, My Brain is Trying to Kill Me. Then there's our patreon.com page for people who wish to make recurring donations and receive some cool merch kits that aren't available anywhere else. Something important that I wanted to humbly point out is that so far, all of this stuff for Bipolar Recorder, all of the visual graphics, books, soundtracks, etc., have been lovingly and unilaterally crafted and created by me. I don't know if you'd consider me an artist, but from the infamous green and purple skeleton book cover on My Brain is Trying to Kill Me, to the podcast's Red Skull cover logo, to the intro and outro music, to the writing itself, it's all created by me. Those are all paintings, digital art, and other content that have come out of my brain over the years and are now available for you to invite into your own home if you want to. The only stuff I outsource is super administrative in nature, mostly stuff like final editing on my manuscripts or general formatting for the final cover designs on my books. In addition to the artistic, creative, American spirit I incorporate into this project, I also handle 1,000% of the production and day-to-day operations of Bipolar Recorder. So maybe if you're kind of like, this guy is just some hippie, I don't know about this, please note that I do take this project extremely seriously, and I'm handling it like you would any growing organization, with professionalism and tact, and hopefully I'm keeping things moving in the right direction. Basically, what I'm saying is, if you enjoy underground art, mental health advocacy, independent activism, American-made stuff, social progress, these would all be good reasons to contribute to Bipolar Recorder and help keep it running. Again, check out bipolarrecorder.com and or patreon.com to find ways to support the project and receive cool tokens of our appreciation. My name is Hunter Keegan. Find me on Twitter at HHKeegan. Find Bipolar Recorder on Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, etc. at Bipolar Recorder. I mentioned a little while back that we were rolling out a Substack a couple of months ago, but that's something that I've decided to pivot away from for various reasons. I might still utilize Substack in the future, but for now I'm focusing on this podcast, my next full-length book, and the peer support spaces and outreach that we conduct on Twitter. I totally appreciate everyone who has supported this project and helped it along the way so far. You're really awesome. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And I love to know that this show is resonating with people and continuing to elicit the types of responses that we're looking for. Listeners reach out to me every week with notes about how these stories have helped them in some way or even taught them something new. And that's what this is all about. Thank you again for listening. Have a wonderful day, evening, or night, wherever you are. Bipolar Recorder is a listener-supported show. To help keep the show running, consider checking out our Patreon page or visiting bipolarrecorder.com.
Unless otherwise stated, the hosts and guests on Bipolar Recorder are not licensed mental health professionals. Bipolar Recorder is not a substitute for therapy or professional medical intervention. If you are having a mental health crisis, please contact your local emergency services.